Violent Night may not be a great film, but it has many great moments in it. This film is what you get when you take Die Hard, Home Alone, and, to an extent, Bad Santa, and threw them all in a blender. It's a film that lets you know exactly what you're in for, from its title to its rather disgusting opening scene. An irreverent, gory action comedy with Santa Claus as the profanity-spewing alcoholic action hero. For some, this may not be their cup of tea, but for me, I personally had a blast with it. Because not only is this a really funny dark comedy, it's also a good action film that takes itself just seriously enough while also knowing precisely what it is. The film stars David Harbour as the millennium-old Saint Nick, who, while disillusioned by what Christmas has become, to the point where he regularly drowns his sorrows, still delivers presents to those who need him most. And on one fateful Christmas Eve night, Santa is delivering gifts to a wealthy family estate, when at that exact moment, a band of robbers, led by John Leguizamo, swarm in and take the family hostage. And so it's up to Santa Claus himself to take on these criminals and save the family, particularly the young girl of the family who still believes in him. Violent Night is one of those films that in concept feels more like a parody than an actual film. And I have to admit, I was a little nervous going into it because I thought they weren't going to be able to keep the film's momentum going. But there are a number of things about this film that really shocked me that helped elevate it. Probably one of the better elements is that I like this film's interpretation of Santa for the most part. I can totally buy that the same St. Nicholas who's been around for hundreds of years has become disillusioned with the holiday and with the cynicism of our modern world. This Santa isn't just being mean and callous for the sake of it. There's an actual reason for why he is the way he is, and it's totally believable. There's even some nice touches to the Santa mythos this time around. Like, this film makes it a point that Santa doesn't visit every single home anymore, but rather just the kids who need him. I actually think that's an interesting detail, and it's something I've never seen in any other Santa story, but it's a detail that I really like. And that's not even getting into David Harbour's fantastic performance, who manages to hit every single note for this character whenever appropriate, sometimes being a lost soul, and other times playing a tough, gritty action character, and other times the warm, kind man that we associate with Santa. Another thing I really appreciate about this film is that it surprisingly takes its premise pretty seriously. Like I mentioned before, there was great care in actually paying respect to the Santa mythos, and this film actually keeps the meta winking at the audience to a pretty bare minimum, something that I'm sure was a great temptation for them to abuse. But I'm glad they kept the self-referential humor to a minimum. I think that would have been too distracting. And there's actually a fair number of scenes of characters actually talking to each other, and we get time in between action scenes for us to catch our breath or to humanize the characters. There's a wonderful scene where Santa reminisces on the terrible man he was before he became Santa, and the girl that he's trying to save, Trudy, offers him some words of encouragement of how he's actually a better man than he gives himself credit for. But on top of that, this film is also unafraid to have an irreverent sense of humor about itself. Like when at one point Santa uses tinsel from a tree to stitch up a bloody wound, or when he uses a pointy candy cane to stab a man to death. This film actively utilizes the setup for both some great action scenes and some wonderfully creative kills, as well as the basis for some clever or funny jokes. By far the highlight of the film for me, without giving away too much, is the scene that acts as an homage to Home Alone. Like I said, I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say that it's probably the funniest and most gruesome loving homage to Home Alone that I've ever seen. That being said, I do think there are a few stumbles that need to be addressed. For instance, the film seems like it's setting up some kind of theme about how the rich need to do more to help the poor. Santa at one point makes a reference to how he normally doesn't interfere with other people's business, and the bad guy says, "Maybe you should." And I thought, maybe it was supposed to be a metaphor for how those in a position of power and wealth should use their wealth to try to help the less fortunate than themselves by getting actively involved. But the film doesn't really do anything with this dichotomy. It just kind of lets it sit there, never really committing itself to the idea. Especially when the pieces for the commentary are right there. I'm also unsure how I feel about parts of Santa's arc in this film. Like, I know the whole point of his character is that he's lost the sense of goodwill and the Christmas spirit, and he also says that he doesn't like to interfere with other people's business, but still, I don't know. There's just something off-putting about watching Santa Claus nearly abandon a family that's being held hostage, even a Santa that's supposed to be a bit darker and grittier. I don't know, that's probably something they should have taken a closer look at. There's also one too many scenes that are a little bit predictable. Like, if you've seen Die Hard 2, you know exactly how a certain story beat is going to play out. There's also the typical complaints I have with many modern action films. CGI blood spurts, sometimes the action's too dark to actually see anything, and there's a bit too many cuts during the action for my liking. I guess I'm just spoiled by the likes of movies like John Wick and Nobody. Like I said, I wouldn't call this a great film. It's got a few too many mistakes for that, but man, the stuff that works in here really works. I enjoyed watching most of these characters. The acting for most of them is great, and it's actually a good action film that knows how to utilize its premise and is really funny. There are many scenes that had me howling with laughter. Violent Night is obviously not for everyone. It definitely earns its R rating, but those who could enjoy a film like this, I think will enjoy it. Or at the very least, I think it's worth it for them to give it a chance. Violent Night gets a solid 7.5 out of 10. Anyway, I guess that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.